Hi, and welcome back to Beyond the Monsters. Today I have Melissa Greene here with me. She is a writer, she is a musician, she has a book coming out. There's just so many things, and you were a pastor.
Mhm.
So we're going to talk today about church trauma. And Melissa's got a pretty strong story to tell us today regarding the church and different things that you went through. And we're going to get into that today. Okay, Melissa. So, can you start by just telling us a little bit about the history you have with the church and the things that you've done?
Yeah.
Okay.
So I appreciate, first of all, you having me
Hmm.
on. Excited to talk to you and honored to do so. Yeah, I've been a bit of a Renaissance woman. I grew up in Florida, ended up in Nashville over 20 years ago now. We
Wow.
basically consider Nashville home, but grew up in Florida, grew up in the church. We'll come back to that.
Mhm.
After college, I went and started singing as a part of a Christian music group and toured the world for the next 10 years doing that. Resigned
Wow.
from that, went into a church then, went in to start doing the music as the worship leader at the time. And at that church, it was like, there's no glass ceiling here for women. So we see your potential as a pastor and we'd like to get you ordained. So I went through a 3-year ordination process and ended up
Wow.
pastoring there as the associate pastor for 8 years and then left that church for good reason.
Okay.
So since then, I've started a nonprofit and I've been writing and I still do a prison concert outreach. And again, I'm a bit all over the place, but try to find ways ultimately to help people understand their worth because that's something that the church did not teach me, unfortunately.
Mm.
So, I grew up in a very conservative mega church. It was a Southern Baptist church in Florida, sort of right outside of Tampa. And I like to tell people my introduction to God was someone telling me that I was going to hell, and I was 5 years
Oh.
old. And
Oh.
I was like, wait, what? Or at the time I was like, oh no. But
Right.
looking back, it's very much like, wait, what? That's how you want to introduce me to some loving creator is by telling me I'm headed to hell. So I was like surrounded by people that used fear as a tactic to try to get people to become a Christian. And for so many of us that grew up in church settings like that, it was constantly, everything was fear based. And so you were constantly being told, if you basically you're born a sinner, you're born separated from God, and you're on this trajectory heading to hell. And you want to then do anything you can to fix that, right? Like
Right.
you are like scared to death as a child. They also used to talk a lot in our Baptist church about the rapture and that at any time God would come back and take God's people, his people, God was always a male, his people, and you didn't want to be left behind. And then there was this whole book series that came out when I was in high school called the Left Behind series. And I read every single one of those books. They're like national bestsellers, but it was all about, again, the rapture and the afterlife and torture of people that didn't become Christians. And so we just were constantly told, I mean, obviously that's not what I want to do. I don't want to go to hell. I don't want to burn forever.
Right.
And so I became saved um, at
So,
six.
oh, it's
6 years old.
so how did that carry over into like regular life? Like you're 5 or 6, you're in what, kindergarten, first grade, and you're learning all these things at church,
Yes.
in all these different ways that everything's supposed to be. How did you relate to other kids that weren't part of that church? Like,
Right. Yeah, I think my whole childhood, one, I was fearful. I mean, the church, my church, that church taught me to fear, like deeply fear the world, deeply fear anybody that didn't look like us, didn't think like us, didn't believe like us, that everyone else ultimately was wrong. Right. And so, like,
okay,
I was put in this very small bubble of people who supposedly held the corner on truth. Like, we knew everything, we were the right ones.
right.
And so I constantly then viewed others because I grew up in a public school, not just high school. I went to public school my whole life, and I was surrounded by tons of people that weren't Christian, like did not go to church.
Right.
Where I grew up in Florida, very different than here in the Bible Belt in Tennessee, where we live now, where like everybody goes to church. seemingly. In Florida, it wasn't like that. And so I had a ton of friends that were not Christians, and I constantly was fearful for them. Like,
Oh, right.
I was taught that they were wrong, that they were on the outside, that they were sinners, don't hang around with them. There was lots of like, they're going to pull you down. Lots of peer pressure would, we were taught that peer pressure would happen and they would pull us back into, sinning and misbehaving. But my heart broke more for my friends that I thought, well, I think they're good people. I think these are good kids. Again, like trying to process
Right.
just growing
So
up in general,
young.
much less trying to process that everyone around me, especially at my school, um, was not as good as me, was not, seen the same from God as God sees me.
Right.
And that just, it was really hard to try to line everything up. Like, wait, because again, I thought these kids were good kids. They were nice to me. I loved hanging around them. I didn't
Mhm.
think they did anything bad. But here I was at the church, being taught completely opposite of that. And so, if anything, it just taught me that there's an us versus them.
Did you communicate some of these things, like, to your friends when you were younger that you remember?
Yes. I mean, what I do remember was bringing my Bible to school, and I probably bought literally like the biggest Bible you could have. And so I'd like bring my big Bible to school, and I thought I was such a good girl for doing that. And I would talk to my friends about God as best I knew how, which ended up not being very inviting to them or
Right,
welcoming. It
right,
felt more
right,
condemning, I'm sure, because that's
right.
what I was taught. And so I think eventually by high school, I was sort of known as the Christian girl and
Okay,
maybe kept in some ways at arm's length. Like, we
right.
like you, I was still like I was co-captain the cheerleaders and did all the social things at school, but I never was fully in with the school crowd. And I think it had a lot to do with my
That
beliefs and how I portrayed them.
right,
Um,
right. God, that had to be so hard growing up like that because you were, like, in this bubble, your own bubble, and then you have all your friends, and their parents are probably judging, teachers are even probably
yes.
judging, and God,
Oh,
it had to be scary.
well, and looking back, I'm just sad. I'm sad for me, and I'm sad for how no doubt I treated others that were different than me. Because again, it was almost like what was instilled in me from, 6 years old on was again that like you were who's right, and you were ultimately then who's good. And you need to get everybody else on your side.
Right.
Nothing about be curious about others, be curious about not just other religions, but I didn't find out until I got to college. Really, my big Baptist bubble burst when I got to college, and I realized that there's a ton of different denominations out there within Christianity that all believe
Okay.
very different things about the Bible and what the Bible says and how you're supposed to relate to God and et cetera. And so I'm sad for me and for the many others, again, who lived in fear. We
Right.
just lived in fear. You just didn't know. Like, we used to pray a prayer at night, and my parents did the best they could. So I don't judge my parents, but I remember the prayer, as many people maybe said. It said, "Now I lay me down to sleep. I pray the Lord my soul to keep. If I should die before I wake, I pray the Lord my soul to take." Like, every night.
Mhm.
So I was fearful that something might happen and God might not welcome me or accept me.
Right.
So there's just this
Like,
constant
unless
like,
you said your prayer, and I
yes.
yes,
But
yes.
then I was
Gosh.
also taught, like the Baptists were taught, once saved, always saved. So basically, once you were in, you were supposed to be good.
Mhm.
But that wasn't always clearly and consistently then taught through Sunday school and other ways that they would in like the church services. Cause they're just, fear was always, it's like, if we can keep you fearful, we can keep you under our control and you doing and thinking what we want you to think. That's
Right.
ultimately what, looking back, I think that church was doing. They really just wanted to control. They wanted the money to keep coming in to fund what they thought was God's work. And the more they could control you, the better it was for them.
A lot of people would probably say, like, "Oh, that's, like, culty."
Yeah,
Yeah, like, because it is
it
control and
is.
yeah.
1000% it is. And I've been so hesitant. It's like I don't want to play the blame game. I think often people just go down that road and you get stuck in that. You get stuck
Mhm.
playing a victim. However, I 1000% also, again, my heart breaks for me and the, probably millions of others who grow up in very
Right.
similar situations, who should not have to have grown up with fear and in
Mhm.
fear, who should not have been taught that us versus them whole mentality, because it just keeps you constantly on the defensive with everybody,
Right.
versus giving anybody the benefit of the doubt, and or thinking, hey, there's something that you might have to teach me. Like
Right.
I may
Right.
not have it all figured out. And again, it took me till about college to really burst that bubble too, that like I wasn't going to be right about everything that I
Mhm.
believed, because
Right.
Christianity was just at the center of my life. And what I believed, my faith, everything was like, well, at least I know I've got all this right. But then in college, I'm like, wait, I don't have it all right.
Were your parents raised the same?
My
Is that
mom was.
okay?
My mom was, and my dad was. They divorced when I was 2 and both remarried. And then my stepdad, who she married really quickly, he was amazing, but he would just come to church with us sometimes. But my
Mhm.
mom sort of ran the household as far as like where we go to church, what we did. And we just were
Okay.
all in this
Okay.
church, like
Right.
Monday, Wednesday, Sunday, extracurricular things, like all the
Wow.
things.
Wow. So going to college then, was there like a specific thing that happened where you're like, "Whoa, wait. What's going on here?"
Well, there was a lot of things along the way that started to make me question this version of Christianity that I was given. And one happened towards the end of high school from the pulpit, so the platform the pastor was teaching, and he said that there's the scripture in the Bible that says you're unequally yoked. And when he went to talk about what he thinks that means, he said specifically you're unequally yoked if you as a white person marry or date a black person or someone of a different color.
Oh,
And I remember being like, "Wait, what? Like what? Like I've got a ton of black friends in school and I'm attracted to them, and I like,
right.
wait, I can't date because what? Like we're not equal?" So that was the very first thing that really made me like take a step back and be like, maybe this pastor, this head of this church does not have it all right.
Right.
Like cuz this sure doesn't resonate with my soul. And at the time I'd have been like, God, what are you trying to say? Like I thought this pastor represented you and spoke for you, and
Right.
thus we should believe everything he says. And then he says that, and I'm like, no way.
And you probably felt that deep in your
1000%. I
soul.
was like,
Yeah.
thank God for intuition and
Right.
conscience that's like, no, 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 something's wrong here.
Yeah.
So that was the first time that I sort of was like, wait a second. But then when I got to college, I went to a charismatic Pentecostal liberal arts college. So still Christian,
Mhm.
but from a different denomination. So when I got around these Pentecostals who just believed things so differently than I believed about, like they did not believe once saved, always saved. So their idea of salvation was you get saved, but then you can lose that. And to me, that has its own trappings, but still, it was
Right.
just completely different. They also, were moved by music. They felt this thing that which they would describe as the freedom of the spirit, the Holy Spirit moving, and like you could dance and worship and sing and move and all these things that my Baptist church was like, no dancing, no movement, don't raise your hand. Like it was just
Oh,
all very structured. And so at that point, I was like, again, we have this Bible, which at the time, I was like, it's my instruction manual. It's
mhm.
everything that's supposed to hold in it, for living a healthy life. And these people believe drastically different things than I was taught. So it just made me go, okay, one, my bubbles burst.
Right.
What does that mean? So is my theology, is the things that I believe about God wrong, or are they wrong, or is there something in the middle? Like is
Right.
it somewhere in between the two of us? And so that really started to shape me, and I started being willing to read things that were outside of just the authors and the pastors and the people that I grew up with. It was like, no,
Right.
let me read this other view and like take two views into account and see if I see what resonates actually with my heart. Like
Okay.
me beginning to trust myself and not just trust what somebody else told me believe was a huge part of my growth.
So you were finding your whole sense of self at that
Oh,
point. So and it's kind of later in life
yes.
when you're supposed to be doing all that when you're younger.
Right. Oh, there was
Wow.
not room for that. Yeah, I think looking back, we were just told, not just what to believe, but how to act, how to think, how to engage with people. Again, what to think about other people who were
Right.
different. Like
Right.
it was just all very structured. And me, thank goodness, getting away from my Baptist church and going out to college and traveling some and then starting to read some. Like, I still say to this day, travel and reading have shaped me more than anything else. And I'm
Really?
so grateful for that. Like, it just helped me begin to see other perspectives and not always
Mm,
take them on right away just because they're different, but be able to be like, how can I engage with this? How can
right.
I be,
Understand and
yes,
yeah,
understand and listen, like actually listen and see,
right.
is there something here that I should glean, like I should
Right.
take from this person or this, other belief or this other way of life or whatever. So those things happened in college and I'm like, thank goodness. And then that just kept happening. Like once I chose to be open,
Right.
then I just let go of everything, like all the shoulds and you're supposed to's and all of this. And I'm like, no, 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 let me let go of this and just keep trusting like I'm going to find my way and I'm going to trust that I'm hopefully following God or the universe
Mhm.
in what is best, not just for me, but for everyone,
Right.
like for the world.
Right.
Like that's what I was hoping to follow.
So when you were going through this and you're finding yourself and you're growing, did it cause any kind of resentment or just like different feel questioning your mom
Yeah.
even? Because that's what she knew and like you
Mhm.
said she did the best she could, but as a young person, teenage years, early 20s, whatever, you're like most of the time people are just going and they're learning how to be independent. You're
Right.
learning your entire self.
Yeah.
You're being how to be independent and like what the heck is going on? Because
Yeah.
this isn't even reality. So did you harbor like resentment at first or question
I
like
definitely questioned. So I've
okay.
always been like a confrontational person. I'm an 8 on the Enneagram, so I have this like which 8s on the Enneagram are just willing to confront. They're willing to
Mhm.
like let's talk about it. Let's immediately like deal
Right.
with the thing. So I remember calling my mom as soon as any questions would come up and be like, "Did you know this? Did you know about this idea or this whatever it
Right.
was?" And so versus me blaming her and saying how dare you, it was more
Right.
like, wait, do you know this? And if
Right.
you don't, can we talk about it? And she's so beautifully, like, I've always been so proud of my mom. One, she's just a
Mm.
kick-ass rock star. She's always been so nurturing, so present, so solid, so supportive of my sister and I. And so I already had that model in my life, you
Okay,
know?
good.
And when I went back to her with these questions or these things that I was wrestling with, she didn't just take on my new beliefs because they were mine. She really was like, okay, let's talk about it. Or let me also research this. Let me read the books or let me ask some questions. And so she started going on her own journey of like, okay, if it's not all what we were told to believe or how we were told to act or how we were told to treat people, okay, maybe there is something different. There's a way I can grow too. So
Right.
she's, 26, 27 years ahead of me
Right.
and willing sort of to take a similar journey. And so it was remarkable,
See, that's
honestly.
amazing. That's amazing though that you already had that foundation with her
Mhm.
because most of the time kids in these situations, regardless of what it is that they did or didn't know like growing up, they automatically have resentment. They
Sure.
automatically want to blame
Sure,
the
sure,
parent.
sure.
It's just I think it's just easier
Yeah.
that way.
Yeah.
But the fact that she was so understanding and so willing to be open,
Yeah.
I think that's a big deal. That's
Yeah.
pretty awesome.
I am grateful and I deeply respect her. Again, not just for being willing to have the conversations, but for being willing to take her own journey. And so we've both
I love
just
that.
changed and expanded and we've landed in similar places, not exactly the same, which I
Mhm.
respect,
Right,
but
right.
she's taken her own journey. So yeah, I'm grateful. Very grateful.
I love that. That's so awesome.
Yeah.
So we're at college. You're learning.
So college, I left college a semester early from graduating because I had an opportunity to sing. And
Okay.
I felt from when I was 16 years old that I was supposed to like singing was supposed to be my life. Like the work that I did, that's what I was supposed to do with my life. So I went to college as a classical voice major, like that's what I was doing. And then a semester from graduating, this group came around and had auditions, and I made it. And I was like, well, this is what I don't need the college degree. I want to do the thing that I feel called to do.
Right.
So I left college and did it. And for 2 years, I lived on a tour bus, and we made $50 a week. And we sang in over 300 concerts each year. Like it was
Wow.
crazy, like so much work. There was 5 singers and a full band and then an audio person. And we would go into these churches and set up our full rig every night, do the concert, tear down and either sleep on the bus or stay in a host home. which were some
Wow.
crazy situations,
Okay, I
not
bet.
always the best. Some of that is traumatizing, honestly. It's like if you have roaches in your house, maybe don't offer your house up to be a host
Right.
home.
Kind of like some
Anyways,
of those
that's
Airbnbs these days.
totally. It's like maybe
God,
not. Maybe be
nightmares.
wiser.
Yeah.
Um, no, but so those 2 years shaped me too, because I was, one, I had a ton of time to read. Like during the days, we just had off during the day, and I just literally devoured like everything I could on anything. Like again, a range of topics and a range of perspectives on topics. And I loved it. Like it just was so good for me. And then I would have conversations with the
Mm.
people who truly became like family, because you live on a
Right.
tour bus like that. You're either going to love or hate each other.
Right.
And we loved mostly
Sometimes
everybody.
both. Yeah.
Yes, there were some moments
Yeah.
for sure. But I also traveled the world. I went to China and Africa during that time, and the Philippines. And again, that's where I again was confronted with my belief system. And I had to ask myself, I remember specifically being on a small church stage in Africa. And I was spouting out this Bible verse that I had said and passionately and intentionally said and used in my concerts, like to encourage the audience. And
Hmm.
it was from the Psalms, and I would say, King David in the Psalms says, I've never seen the righteous forsaken or his children begging for bread. And I remember saying that in front of this poverty stricken audience in Africa and being like, wait. I think you actually are righteous people, and yet you're begging, like you don't have food. So either the theology and the way that I preach this to my very, privileged Western audiences, it always works here. We're like, oh yeah, most people are fine here and we can trust God to provide for us. But here in Africa, it's like these people are crying out for God and they're
Right.
dying of food and starvation and illnesses and all these things that could be preventable with help. But nonetheless, so it was like a confrontation, like, okay, so either my theology doesn't work, or ultimately, if my theology doesn't work everywhere, then I don't think my theology works. And what do I do with
Right.
that? Like, where is God here? And how
So
does God
more
work here?
awakening for you.
Yes,
Like,
it just
yeah.
was more,
Yeah.
it was confrontational with my lived experience. So I was back with the things that were resonating and or not resonating with the experience I was having with actual lived flesh people,
Right.
despite these disembodied concepts that I was taught to believe. Like when they put into play and practice with real life, it just didn't always work. And so I just, once again, would have to step back and be like, okay, so if it doesn't work like that, then how does it work? Or what do I ultimately believe? What do I
Hmm.
believe about God? What do I believe about these people? And what do I want to do with that? Because again, my whole life was sort of geared towards being in ministry, ultimately
Hmm.
trying to help people.
Right.
So I just remember that was a shift for me to, again, stay open. And maybe it's not, again, check my privilege. It was really about check my privilege, and the ideas that I had about God. Maybe those were a very privileged idea about God and the way God works.
And you were putting like all your faith literally into what you've been taught to believe.
1000%. And
Wow.
trying to pass that on to people, right? Like
Yeah.
that's what ministry was to me, was whatever I had learned and that was helpful for me, how could I pass it on to others? And I think in the purest sense, that's lovely. But
Right.
when you're passing on to others something that's not actually going to resonate with everybody, it's like, okay, so maybe don't pretend like you have all the answers. Maybe you need
Right.
to keep like backing up and checking.
Hmm.
So these are just like touch points in my life where I was like, oh, really confronted with, I think I'm wrong, or I think I'm off. Like maybe
Right.
not completely wrong, but something's off about this. And how can I, as someone who has a platform and is trying to use it wisely,
Hmm.
what do I do? What do I do differently? What can I do differently? And so I ended up, fast forward, did that for 2 years. Met my husband Ben along the way as I was traveling. We got married, moved up here to Nashville because I got into another contemporary
How did you
Christian.
guys meet?
We met, I was touring with that
Because
group.
you guys do have the coolest relationship.
Thank you.
You guys have been together forever,
Yes.
and
24
still,
years,
it's
22
just
years
like so
married.
cute.
Oh,
Like,
thanks.
yes, I
I
love
think
it.
he's pretty great. He's my best friend for sure,
Oh,
for sure.
so
So,
important.
um, we met when I was touring with that group, Truth. His friend was one of the singers with me. And so when we would come to our part of Florida, he would come see her. So I met him
Okay.
just in him visiting her. And I actually thought they liked each other. It's a big running joke because Ben's story and the girl's story and my story are all different about who liked who. But eventually, when I saw him the second time around, like 6 months later, because we would travel to the Tampa area a lot with this group, he came and asked me out, and we ended up going on a triple date with me and the two singers, and he and his two roommates.
Okay.
And then we all ended up getting married. Like
Really?
eventually, yeah. Everybody on that first date.
Is everybody still married?
No. Well, one of the couples isn't. The other two are. Yes.
Okay.
Yes. I know it's crazy. But yeah, so that's how we met. And then he was finishing college. I was still touring with that group. And then when I got off the road, he graduated. And then I got an audition for this contemporary Christian music group called Avalon, based out of Nashville. And I made it. And so we moved up here within the first 6 months of our marriage. And we've
That's
been
when you
here.
left Florida.
Yep.
Okay.
2002.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. And never looked back.
Never looked back. No, I love it here. I love vacationing in Florida.
Same. And we lived there for 20 some years.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't think I'd ever want to live there again. It's just too hot all the time. I mean, there's a lot more than that, but the heat and the humidity.
Yes.
Like at least here in Nashville, you get taste of everything.
Yes. And fall.
Yes.
Well, we were from Ohio, so we're used to fall and all those, fun changes of season. And we do not get that here or in Florida.
Yeah.
It was like, whoa, it's Christmas and it's 90.
Right.
Oh, great. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Okay, so now you guys are in Nashville.
Yeah, so we moved here
Got
and I did
married.
Contemporary Christian Music Group. I did that group just shy of 7 years. And that was another bubble, honestly. I just kept moving as one often does, like bubble to bubble. But along the way, within those 7 years, I sort of had always had, because of my love of arts, I was in musical theater in high school, and then even in my very Christian college, I had a ton of gay friends, just a ton of them. Being in music, there's honestly. So my best friend in college, one of my best friends, just was someone who was gay and we were told, it's not right. It's not right. It's not okay to be gay. You can't be gay and be Christian. God doesn't approve of that. So that story was something I was told my whole life. And yet I traveled, literally lived with, spent life with a ton of these people who I was like, wait, I don't feel like who you are and what you're doing as far as how you love another man, if you're a man or a woman, feels wrong. So again, it was something where I was confronted with an experience that was very different than what the given theology told me was okay. And so while I was singing in Avalon, that was one of the things that this was, I guess, it was the first maybe Obama presidency when civil rights for gay people came out. It happened on my birthday, June 26th. I just can't remember the year. But anyways, I just remember being like, not only do I believe civil rights should be for my friends, I also just don't believe that God thinks that you're wrong. Like that doesn't resonate. And so that was a huge difference based off of the audiences that I sang to predominantly and the people in the group that I sang with. So eventually I was like, this doesn't make sense for me to stay a part of this anymore.
And this is going back probably 20 years ago-ish. So it was very different.
Oh, yeah.
Very different, yes, than today.
Very different. But again, here in Nashville and in that, the contemporary Christian music world in Nashville was a bubble in and of itself. You were supposed to all believe, pretty similarly. And if you didn't, there were repercussions for that. And I watched, I had a friend who was in Avalon with me early on. He was one of the original members who was gay. And when we found out that he was gay, we had to go through a lot of conversations. There's 4 of us in the group with management and with our record label. And ultimately, they asked him to leave because he was gay. So he was no longer allowed to stay in the group. And so I watched someone who I was closest to, who at the time, I didn't know how to. Again, I felt for him. I wanted what was best for him, but I was also thought and believed what he was doing was wrong, which I've since changed. But at the time I did. And so it just felt, one, so helpless. So like I didn't want my friend to have to go through this. And he was devastated. He left a huge career. Like Avalon was huge at the time in Christian music.
So obviously he was super talented too, and that didn't matter.
He's incredibly talented. No, it didn't matter at all. It was like, because we believe this is wrong, you can't be in it. So anyways, I watched him leave, and that was deeply traumatic for him. And he and I have continued to stay friends and are very close now. And he's been so gracious with me as I've changed my views on everything, thankfully. But that just did something to me. Those things are
Mhm.
what have caused me to sort of like, okay, what do I believe? Why am I doing what I'm doing? What do I want to stand for ultimately? Despite the money, despite the fun, despite the
Right.
fame, like in Avalon, I accepted an American Music Award being a part of that group. We were Grammy nominated. Like,
Really?
yeah, I've got all
Oh my
the
god, I did
things.
not know that. That is
Yeah.
awesome.
So it was like big deal. And yet my heart was like very conflicted over ultimately, again, not just what we were saying from a platform, but also how does this play out in the lives of people that I'm close to? So, anyways, I eventually ended up leaving for lots of reasons. I was also pregnant with Haven, my daughter. Hutch had he was born 3 years earlier, and he lived on the tour bus with me. We had a nanny, and
He did?
yes, it was
Aw.
fun and crazy. But when I was pregnant with the second, for all of those reasons, I was like, I want to be off the road. And
Right.
that's when I ended up in a church in Nashville. Which,
Okay.
had you have asked me growing up, one, there was no in my Baptist church and even in the Pentecostal college, women could sing and they could speak, but they could not teach men and they could not be a
Hmm.
pastor. Like it was only men could lead. Like you were under a male's leadership at any point. So
Oh.
women, there was a glass ceiling, 1000% for women in the church, and especially in the churches that I was doing my life in. So when I left Avalon, this other
So
pastor,
Haven, probably that's 15 years, we're talking 15 years
yeah,
ago, right?
15
Okay.
years ago, I left in May. And by the end of the month, I had been approached by this pastor who's like, hey, I'm looking for a worship leader, someone to lead the music for our church. Would you be interested in that? And I was like, gosh, I don't know. I don't know if I want to work in a church, but maybe. And that's when he said, and that's what I mentioned in the intro, like, he said to me, there's no glass ceiling for women here. If you have leadership qualities and I believe you do after we went through the interview process, then I want you to come on as a leader. Will ordain you as a pastor. You'll go through the ordination process, which is a 3-year process,
Mhm.
but there's like the sky's the limit here. And I'd never like
Never heard that.
I'd never heard of that.
Right.
So this was a really pretty progressive church and a thinking church. So anyways, that really excited me. It made me happy to feel seen and feel like, again, it wasn't just my voice. People didn't want to just hear my music. They believed in my leadership and that I
Mhm.
could give more and help lead. So we started there. I literally led music on the stage the week before Haven was born. Then I took like 2 weeks off and then jumped in feet first at that church. And it, in so many ways, was at first the most beautiful experience. Again, it just was so different than any other religious setting I'd been a part of. They were, I say a thinking church, meaning like they asked people, we want you to think about these things. We want you to push back. We want you to ask questions. We want you to be curious. We ended up doing things like even on Sunday mornings, we would have not just a Q&A where people would ask questions and we would give answers, but a Q&R. Like you ask a question, we'll give a response,
Mhm.
and then we'll see if that resonates with you. So there just was so
Oh,
much freedom that again I'd never
weren't
seen in
used
all
to
the
that.
churches we sang in. I sang in every state in America now, and I traveled the world and just been in thousands of churches, and I'd never seen a church like this. So I was grateful, and the community of people there were amazing. And then we went through that church had been around, I don't know how many years at that point, maybe 8 years. It was a younger church, but they decided in the lead pastor decided that we wanted to be fully inclusive church. So meaning LGBTQ people could not at the time. So every other church I'd been in, you could be gay and attend the church. You could be gay and serve in the background, like, you know, serve in the children's ministry, possibly, serve setting up things, tearing down things. You could not be
So
gay.
not equal.
Oh, no, it was never
Yeah.
equal. You could not be gay and sing on the platform. Like if you were fully gay, you could not sing on the platform. You could not hold a leadership position, but like we'll take your tithe every week. Like we'll take your money.
Mhm.
So this was
Yeah.
consistent everywhere in everywhere that I had been. But our pastor and us as a staff decided, okay, we want to change it. Like, we don't actually believe this is wrong. We believe that there's a lot of sin in people's lives. There's a lot of things that we do wrong, but people two men or two women, a transgender person in and of themselves are not wrong and sinful. So we want to be fully inclusive. So we made national news. It was a big to do because we were what's considered an evangelical church. We would have said
Mhm.
post evangelical because we were more open minded and a questioning, curious church. But nonetheless, so we went inclusive and we lost half the church. They didn't approve of it. They didn't
Wow.
love it. And, a lot of the money that was coming in to support us. But in many ways, that community that was in the aftermath of all of that was great. Like everybody was pulling together.
Right.
Everybody was like, we're in this. We believe in this. So let's keep going. So again, it was beautiful for a good many years, although that whole season was very hard.
Oh, I'm sure.
Um, and then towards the end, the trauma that happened there, ultimately, I found that church, like every other church, had a system in place that did not have accountability for leadership.
Mm.
And my frustrations with the senior pastor, and I was very vocal about this when I was leaving, he was sort of at a place where he was on like a sabbatical, which is like he'll only come in on Sunday
Mhm.
mornings, but otherwise not work. And there was allowances for that to for a certain time period. And then he was supposed to come back. And in the meantime, I was like a freshly appointed associate pastor. I was so excited to sort of learn all the things about the church and help
Mhm.
lead. But I was never given a bonus or a raise. There was no money. Well, again, we were a much smaller church because of what we had gone through. So the money was sort of limited everywhere, but they weren't limiting things for the senior pastor. And so it just ended up that I was doing a ton of work and not like expected to do it, but not being recognized for it. And they kept saying, like the leadership at the time was like, oh, well, when you go get your master's, which I was planning on doing, then we'll give you the raise. And in the meantime, the senior pastor had not had his
I
master's
was just
yet.
gonna ask that.
Nope. So there's just were so much hypocrisy and lack of consistency. And I started calling that out and trying to lift the curtain. And, people did not want to, most people in the community I have found, they want the leadership to deal with all that.
Mhm.
But the problem is when the leadership or the people that you have in place, be it the board or your staff, are unwilling to deal with it, then you want to you want to raise it to the community so that they can help call everybody accountable.
Sure.
And I did that. I was a bit of a whistleblower, if you will. And there was another gal on staff, the children's pastor, who was with me at the time saying the same things. And it was not accepted. I mean, it was ultimately not accepted.
How did
And
people respond? Like, what was their reaction to all
it was
this?
there were many people that believed us. They just didn't know what to do, like how to fix it.
Mhm.
There were many people that did not believe us, period, that this pastor and or that there was anything unhealthy going on. Despite literally I had like receipts. Like I'm like, I will show you.
They just didn't wanna see it.
They did not want to
Mhm.
see it. And then there were many people, like the third, and it's not equal thirds, but let's say there's a portion of people that believed us, there's a portion of people that did not believe us, and then there's a portion of people that were just ultimately, and I get this in hindsight, so sad to see this thing torn apart,
Mhm.
even if it was for good reason.
Right. Well, change is hard for people.
Oh, it's so
So,
hard. And
yeah.
it's so hard when what you receive is good, like what you're getting is good, but when the people giving it to you want to say, "But I want this to be good and healthy too, not just the performance of it on a Sunday morning." And there was just a disconnect like, "Ugh, I wish you hadn't." They weren't saying that, but that
Mhm.
is what I felt. And that's what I've seen. And I resonate and understand hindsight how hard it was that despite what was very unfair to me and unfair to the children's pastor and what we thought was ultimately unfair for the community. It was like, let's get all this healthy. Like, let's sort of call it
Mhm.
all out so we can get it all healthy and accountable, not because we want to destroy anything and not because we're trying to like walk away for the sake of like being bitchy about it. What we want is health. We want health for us
Right.
and for y'all. And I think it can be healthy consistently, but lots of things have to change. And that put a lot of work on the community that had not been asked to do that kind of work before. And so I think it
Mhm.
felt unfair. And I
Right.
understand that. Like
Mhm.
that at the time I did not understand it. I was heartbroken that people could not see, and it wasn't everybody, again, there's just a portion of people that, but that the portion of people would rather stay with unhealth
Right.
than push back and do the work to make it all healthy. But
Make
again,
those changes.
oh,
Some people just can't do it.
they can't do it, and we've not been taught to do it, because I'm
Right.
back in so many people that grew up like me, it's sort of like, "No, no, no, this is what we've had in the past, and
Follow
now this is what
this.
you should have, and so this is the way we've always done it, so this is the way you're supposed to do it." Like, that's how so many of us have been taught
Right.
in every way of life, and it's like, "No, no, no, I think things need to actually evolve, and they
Mhm.
can get better, and they can get healthier, and it's okay to be able to ask for accountability from everyone, including whoever's at the top, you
Right.
know?"
Right. Did you get any kind of nasty backlash? There had to be some.
I mean,
People that's just people.
it's just people.
Yeah.
Yeah, there was some nastiness. We had a couple of church-wide, like, forums where we would come on a Wednesday night, and, like,
Mhm.
the children's pastor and I, and then the senior pastor would be on a platform, and people could just ask questions,
Oh,
and people were very defensive for him, and so they would spout off, basically that I was power hungry or just wanting power or money, and I'm like, "Wait, I'm a woman.
yeah.
I'm doing this much work compared to the man who's now doing this much work, and you want to pay him almost triple what I'm getting
Wow.
paid. Like, this is not me power hungry. This
Right.
is me asking for fairness and
Right.
asking for you to want fairness for your
Mhm.
leadership and accountability. So, anyways, that was one of the most hurtful things that happened. And that person, and then I later went to a lunch with him too, trying to like help him at least understand my perspective, and he still couldn't. And that broke my heart. Again, lots of it
Right.
just
Right.
broke my heart. And I think I left that whole situation because I ended up I resigned, and I said I was going to resign and stay on for a month and help transition, but the more things that came out sort of ugly and that the pastor and the leadership were unwilling to meet me on, I couldn't co I was like, "No,
Right.
I'm not coming back."
Yeah,
I
I don't blame you.
I deeply believe, and part of the book I'm writing is, like, the value of burning bridges. We were taught to, like, never burn a bridge, never burn a bridge,
Mhm.
never burn a bridge, and I'm like, if what relationship, like, you and a person, you and a church, you and a workspace, whatever, if both of you are not willing to say, "I see the unhealth here, and let's find a way to fix it," like, let's find a
Right.
way to make the bridge healthy again, if you're not willing to meet me there, then I will burn that damn bridge
Right.
and I
Right.
will walk away, because me staying in it is
Too
modeling
toxic.
for others. It's hurtful for me, and it's modeling for others to
Mhm.
stay in situations like
Right.
that. And I was like, I won't stay. So I left. Um, and I just remember feeling my biggest heartbreak was feeling so misunderstood. Um,
I can see that.
yeah, I didn't need everybody to like me, but I did want everybody to understand why I was doing what I was doing, and to understand the harm that the way, again, I kept saying, it's not just the pastor. The pastor had so much good in him. I learned actually so much from him. He's brilliant, and he changed my perspective on a ton of things. And I am not the person ultimately I am today without sitting under some of his leadership. So I name
Mhm.
that. So it's not, I never wanted to blame him fully. I wanted to blame the structure that was in place that was unwilling to not only call him into accountability for lots
Mhm.
of things, but to keep all of us accountable.
Right.
Like, are you willing to us not to just grow as a church and shift on major things like we did with the inclusivity? Like, it was such a beautiful, huge shift. It was like, no, maybe some other things might need to change too. So let's be willing.
Right.
And they weren't, and many weren't.
Probably so frustrating too, because you're like over here just like, hey, I just want you guys to understand what I'm trying to do.
Right. It was
Uh,
hard. Yeah, it was really hard. But I left and I started a nonprofit out of that. The nonprofit that I still have, that was 7 years ago, and it's called
oh.
Imaginarium. And I knew I wanted to start. I say it's like we said from the beginning, it's a non religious space, but still deeply spiritual, because we believe
Mhm.
life is spiritual. And ultimately, We did not want to have a hierarchy. So even though I was a leader, I was like, let me come down and be in the center of a circle of people that we
Mhm.
make decisions together. Like
Right.
I still cast vision, I still bring ideas, I still push back if I don't agree with what somebody else on the leadership team says or wants.
Mhm.
Like there's that, but there is still deep accountability built in from the beginning that
Right.
it will not be the Melissa show. Like I just was so
Over
tired of it
that.
being
Yeah.
about one person. I'm
Right.
like, it can't be that anymore. So Imaginarium was like, we're going to be a spiritual community. We believe all of life is spiritual. And we want to help people understand our connection to each other, the responsibility that each of us holds to being better ourselves and
Mhm.
helping the world become better, and then to help each person understand our inherent worth and what I say magic. And I found that along the way, like in every church space I've ever been in the prison work that I did, um, I
Oh,
just
yes, we haven't even touched on that.
I've been all over the place.
No.
But I have just found that so many people do not understand their inherent worth, and
For
thus
sure.
they don't then live out of some sense of like, I have a self worth and I should be able to ask for this in a relationship or ask for this in a job or ask for
Mhm.
this in life. And thus, then they also don't often respect others. They can't come in with the benefit of the doubt because they've been taught, like I was growing up, like, no,
Mhm.
you're right on this side, and they must be wrong, or they're different, so they're other. And it's like, no, no, no,
Mhm.
no. Everyone has inherent worth. So if you can
Right.
start recognizing that, it doesn't mean everybody's perfect. It doesn't mean
Mhm.
everybody does everything well or is right. It does
For
mean,
sure.
though, like, let me respect you. Let me be
Mhm.
able to listen and hear from you and hopefully learn something from you. And hopefully you can learn something from me too
Mhm.
as we go on in relationship.
Right.
So that's what Imaginarium is built on. And we're 7 years in, and it's like ebbed and flowed. And it would have been a hell of a lot easier if I had started a church. Like, I just feel like it would probably be thriving now if I went and
Right.
started a church, but that's not what we wanted to do. And I'm grateful for that. But
Well, even what you guys are doing right now, how many coats are you guys
oh, so we
giving
partner
away? I know, I
every
love that.
year. This is our 7th year doing it too, because we've been around 7
Okay.
years, and we've partnered with a local school up in Nashville, and we've done it with 4 different schools at this point.
Okay.
But we find schools that serve sort of underprivileged communities
Mhm.
in Nashville, and we find out from the parents through the teachers and the staff who does not have a winter coat. Like Nashville got freezing last
Yeah.
week, like
Right.
already.
Mhm.
We were under 30 degrees. And it's crazy that some of these kids and
Don't
many
have a
people in this
coat.
town do not have
I
coats, or they're
know.
too small, or they're huge, they're
Right.
just getting hand-me-downs or
Right.
whatever. And so we raise money to buy new winter coats for them, and then we give them
Oh.
to them next week, always the week before
Oh my
winter
god, I
break.
love that. I
Yeah.
love that. God, because that could be some of them. That's their Christmas present.
Oh,
Like,
totally. Them even just getting to open a package
yes.
is lovely. Like watching their eyes light up, like it's a beautiful thing.
Yeah. We
Yeah.
have to put a link on
Yeah.
the podcast for that too,
Love
just
to.
so they know.
Yeah.
So do you wanna touch on any of your,
Prison?
uh-huh. I feel like that's a whole nother podcast episode.
I mean, it really is. Prison. Yeah, being in prisons has changed me drastically
Mhm.
in the best of ways.
Mhm. Okay, so as far as the prison systems, let's definitely plan on doing a whole nother
Okay,
episode on
great.
that, but give us some highlights just because I think that that's such a big part of all the things you've done,
Yeah.
and I can relate
Yeah.
to a lot of it too. So I can't wait to hear. Like we haven't talked about it
I know.
like in depth.
Okay, so the brief overview is that back in 2017, I think it was 17. No. Oh my goodness. When was Haven born? No, 2011. 2011.
Okay.
Back in 2011, the administrator from the church I was at, so this was when I was at the church,
Okay.
he had been doing this prison ministry where he would he and his friend, he had a friend who was like a Southern gospel singer, and he and his friend would go down to these prisons in Florida. So
Mhm.
ironically, and do these walk through the Bible workshops or personality workshop, and then the Southern gospel singer would sing. So they had this thing called Timothy's Gift, and it was because the administrator Ron had met or he heard the story on, I think it was a Dateline episode of this man, Timothy Kane, who at 16 years old in Florida ended up being a part of a robbery with 2 older kids. And when they were in the house together doing the robbery, the older kids shot and killed the homeowner. But because of the law in Florida, Timothy was tried equally with the kids for
Because he
murder
was
because
there.
he was in the house. So he
Mm,
went to for life as a 16-year-old. So Dateline's like sharing this story. So my friend Ron at the time was like, I want to meet him. Like I want to hear more of his story. So he
right.
befriends this guy who at the time was probably in his 20s,
Mhm.
late 20s. And he befriended him. And then Ron's like, I want to start a prison ministry. So they called it Timothy's Gift. We want to give back to people like Timothy. So all that to say, that had been going for a couple years. But Ron said to me as the singer musician, he's like, would you be interested in taking like a bigger concert to prisons? And I'm like, yeah, I would love to do that.
Mhm.
So 2011, December, we took a group of people from the church. It was just us with tracks, one guitar player. And we did 11 concerts in like 6 days. Like it was like 2 prisons a day, maximum
Really?
security. Florida has one of the largest group
Yeah.
of prisons in the country outside of Texas and I think California. And so we did 11 prisons, but I remember it was the second day, I think, of the tour. We had done a prison concert that morning, and we were out at the hotel resting, and the news about Sandy Hook broke.
Right.
So I had done a prison. We were supposed to go back into a prison that night. And I remember being devastated for what had happened,
Sure.
obviously.
Right.
Horrible. And I also remember thinking, you're going in tonight to sing and minister, to give back, not to the victims of crimes like this, but to the perpetrators.
Right.
And do you believe they need this? Like, is this worth your time?
Mhm.
And it was a very confronting thing. Like, it's a big deal. I mean, you see children being shot and killed,
Mhm.
and it's like, wait, do I want to spend my time speaking to these men? It was a men's prison. And I
And
just,
I do understand you from that point because in doing forensic psych for
mm-hmm,
so long, when I would have a murderer,
mm-hmm,
a child rapist,
mm-hmm,
people like that across from my desk,
mm-hmm.
like it's like you have to make sure you don't judge. You
Right,
question yourself. Can I do this?
right.
So I can't imagine
And
like
if you and I aren't willing to do this,
mhm.
who is?
Right.
And that's what it came down to for me. It wasn't a like, are these perpetrators worth more than the victims? It's not that
Correct.
question.
Yes.
It's that I believe that most victims and their families are cared for or attempted to be cared for.
Mhm.
Most of the time, no one's going to these perpetrators to say,
Right.
hey, not only why did you do this? How did it get here? But
Mhm.
being able to say, I see you. Like, I actually see you and
Right.
I believe you have inherent worth. So let's talk about calling you to your highest self because it's obvious that you haven't lived into this
Right.
yet.
Right.
And I think, again, most of these men had never, like the family systems that they grew up in, the type of cultural environments that they grew up in, there's so many things that did not help them from moment one understand who they were and what they were capable of for good.
Right.
Right?
And we have a hard time just as human beings, criminals, we just look at them as all bad. They're monsters.
Right.
They did
Right.
this. But we don't ever, I mean, I'm sure some people do, but a lot of people don't step back. And it's not to make an excuse for them,
Right.
but it's like, oh my God. You hear their stories and you're like,
Yes.
holy shit.
Yes.
The hell they went through.
Yes.
And it's like, again, it's not an excuse for them, but there was no one there.
No.
No one.
It's like hurt people hurt
yes,
people.
Yes.
So how do we recognize
Right.
that? And are some of us willing then to go into the people that have been hurting people
Right.
and call them back? What I say, call them back to themselves.
Yeah.
And so that's the work I committed to do. And I did it for the next 5 years. We went to 127 prisons over those next 5 years. I did 11 tours. And then when I left the church, that door closed because the man stayed with the church. And then I've just started my own prison outreach since then because I'm like, I have to keep doing this.
I love
It's too much in my heart.
Yeah.
And all the people that I've brought, which I can't wait to share, like it changed them too.
Mhm.
And story after story, not just of hopefully how we've helped the people that we sang for and speak to, but how it changed us.
Yeah. And I think even you going there and bringing some kind of awareness to them that there is good in the world, like even after what you've done and the things that you have done, that you still can be loved.
Yes.
You still can ask for forgiveness.
Yes.
And, because a lot of times a lot of the criminals, they honestly, at the moment, they don't give a shit. They're not remorseful. They're
Right.
not all those things. But I think giving them some kind of hope
Yeah.
and going in there like
Yes.
that makes them think maybe there is a chance for me, or
Yeah.
maybe I can help someone else. I think they truly start to believe and think that there might be some good in them.
Yes.
Because you're going in there and you're telling them.
1000%.
And they probably never heard it before.
Exactly.
So sad.
I know.
So needed. Wow. Okay, I think well, should we leave it at that?
Yeah.
And we're going to have a good one all about that, because there's so much to talk about with that. I'm sure you have stories too of
Yes.
conversations and
Yes.
all the things with them.
Yeah.
And Melissa has a concert coming up on December 23rd in Nashville. And we'll put links on the podcast, the body of the podcast too. And if you have not heard her sing, and I've known you for a little bit now, year and a half or whatever, and when I just heard that video from the video that you did from the Christmas,
Yeah.
like Braden, our grandson, Braden, who knows Melissa, he and dances with her daughter. He was in the background. I'm like, listen to this, Braden. And he goes, listens. And he's like, that's Melissa. I'm like, how do you know? Because I could tell. It's how she talks.
I love it.
Yeah. But it was pretty amazing. So, if you're in the Nashville area, it's definitely something to go to. And there's plenty of links too with you singing that we could stick on there.
Yeah.
Other than that, I'm so glad and honored that you sat down today, because we have so much to talk about. You've done so much.
I appreciate it.
Stay tuned for the next one. See you guys later.